Welcome everyone to 11 Alive Plus. I'm Ron Jones along with Caitlin Ross here as well. In just a few minutes, the Atlanta Police Department will discuss and hopefully provide updates about the two open cold cases from 2021. APD's homicide unit will revisit the murder of David Mack. That's a 12-year-old boy who was found dead in the woods near his home in February of last year. Now, at the time, the victim's grandmother told 11 Alive, she told John Sherrick that she was on the phone with Mack before his disappearance. He asked to go to a friend's house, told his grandmother that he loved her. He was actually going to go play football, apparently. And investigators say he never made it back home. Then a day later, his body was found beaten, shot 6 times in the woods right near his home.
Absolutely horrifying case. And I think in speaking with his family over this last year, it's just driven home what an incredible kid he was, how kind he was, and how much he meant to his family. And we really have never gotten any answers. The last time we spoke with his grandmother, she says at this point she feels like she's given up hope. She doesn't know that there's ever going to be any answers. Right. And there's another family here in Atlanta also seeking answers. On the first anniversary of her death today, APD is going to discuss the brutal stabbing of 40-year-old Katie Janness. Last July, her body was found in Piedmont Park with over 50 stab wounds. At the time, Janness's partner located her body, and APD is starting that news conference now, so we're going to jump in.
Justice to families and communities have been impacted and victimized by a homicide. And we're here today to brief you on 2 of those. And before our homicide commander and our deputy chief of CID comes forward to speak to you, I just want to emphasize a couple things. Every homicide is important to this police department. And while we're here today on an anniversary of one in the Midtown community that occurred a year ago, every day since that occurrence, we have been committed to solving that homicide. And we'll speak also on one that occurred 17 months ago, which we will ask for the public's help on, that this police department is committed to bring resolution and closure for the family and healing for the Westwood Terrace community and the Midtown community. There is not a day that we're not committed in solving crimes. You see our clearance rate. You all often report on the times that we bring individuals to justice, and we tell the community and families who was responsible for the damage done. That same commitment, that ability to solve those homicides is applied to every single homicide that occurs in that city, because we know there is a family impacted and we know there is a neighborhood impacted. And so when we look back and say what has occurred for the last 12 months or the last 17 months, 2 things should never be in doubt: that this department cares and we're committed to solve that homicide, and this department has the capability to solve those homicides. Neither one is lacking in the 2 cases that you'll hear today. And I'm also mindful there's other families that will not hear their loved one's name today, that are cases that remain open, that this police department is working to solve and ensure that those neighborhoods and those families get the closure and the justice they deserve. So I'm going to bring now to the podium Deputy Chief Hampton, who is the commander of our Criminal Investigations Division, to start the overview of the 2 cases today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Deputy Chief Charles Hampton, Jr. As Chief stated, the first case we'll talk about happened on February 10th of 2021. And as we approach the beginning of the school year, it's important that we're mindful that our kids are important to us as well. But on that day, a 12-year-old was shot and killed in our city of Atlanta. And we're asking the community, we're asking friends, we're asking people who we believe have information on that particular homicide of David Mack to come forward and let us know what happened. We're asking people to call Crime Stoppers where they can remain anonymous. But it's important to us, as Chief Shearbaum stated. Our detectives assigned to the homicide unit spend countless hours trying to solve cases. And many cases are solved by the commitment and the cooperation from our community. And so this is a plea that we ask you to do the right thing and help us bring closure to this family that's been suffering for the last 17 months. Major Peak will go into a little bit more great detail of that case. But again, our plea is to help us so we can help this family bring closure to this 12-year-old.
How you doing? As you heard, David Mack was 12 years of age at the time he was killed. David Mack was a grandson, loved dearly by his grandmother, a son, brother, and friends to many in the neighborhood. He was reported missing on February 9th, 2001 by his grandmother because he failed to return home. Tragically, he was found deceased within 24 hours on February 10th, within a half-mile of his home. Investigators continue to follow up on leads that come in. However, they slowed down since the last press conference. We've recanvassed the neighborhood. Investigators strongly believe with the public's help, we can bring this case to a close and bring the person or persons involved in his death to justice. The Mack family, the Atlanta Police Department, and particularly Homicide Investigator Malone, asks that if you have any information, please contact the Atlanta Police Homicide Office, Crime Stoppers, regardless of how minute you think that information you have related to David Mack. It may just be what we need to break this case, to find a motive and bring someone to justice. Thank you.
We know that you all are also going to hear about Katie Janness, but before we move to that particular case, we're going to allow you to ask questions if you have questions regarding David Mack.
Regarding Mack, do y'all believe this was gang-related, and was there more than one person involved in the shooting? I understand he was shot multiple times, and I understand beat up as well. Yeah.
So right now, we can't truly say it is gang-related, and we don't know if there are multiple people involved at this time.
Are there any persons of interest?
No, not exactly. We've received information from family and friends, people that was associated with him, but as of right now, they've been ruled out.
Any suspects?
No.
At that park nearby, were the security cameras working, and if so, was he ever seen on security camera?
From my understanding, the security cameras were not working.
We're not working at the tennis court?
Yes, but don't hold me to that. But right now, I'm pretty sure they weren't working.
You know if they've since been repaired and are now working for that community?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
We interviewed his grandmother last year, and she described him being on a video chat with her and someone off screen. She heard someone's voice off screen, basically telling him to wrap up that call or end it or whatnot. Have you all been able to talk with people who were with him shortly before he was killed, possibly that individual?
We've talked to people before, but we can't say we've identified that person that was actually with him that the grandmother heard.
Thank you. Just to be clear, so that means that some people that you wish that you could talk to maybe still haven't.
Yes. Yes, and I think there's possibly some that we have talked to that have additional information that will help us in this case as well.
Why do you think that they are not coming forward to speak?
Possibly scared. Just other individuals, if they know who committed this crime.
Any reassurance that you could give folks in that position? It's got to feel tough for them.
It's tough, and again, we can't say 100% that, we'll be able to prevent anything else, but we make due diligence that if you do come with that information and you are in fear of your life, we do reach out to other resources to hopefully keep you safe and without returning to that area.
And no weapon was ever recovered in that set?
No.
Thank you, Major B. We're going to move into the next case, which is in regards to Katie Janness. I asked the media that you get your information from public affairs. We know that there are several people who say that they are sources and they may have information that they think is important to you as reporters. However, some of that information is not correct. So if there are any updates, I ask that you trust the updates that come from the Atlanta Police Department Public Affairs Unit, because that information has been vetted by the folks who you see behind me. So I really want to make that plea to the media to avoid any misinformation or any information that may incite fear in the community that is actually unnecessary. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Hampton, and he's going to go into detail as it relates to the Katie Janness case. Thank you.
Good afternoon again. A year ago today, we responded out to Piedmont Park on a tragic death. This case continues to be very active. We continue to have the support and the assistance from the FBI, the GBI, as well as the District Attorney's Office. We continue to receive Crime Stoppers tips on this case. And so we follow up on every lead that is coming in into this case. We have not at this time identified a suspect. And so everyone, until we can identify a suspect, is still considered a suspect until we can officially rule them out. Most homicide cases, on average, can take up to 147 hours of investigative time. And again, we're 12 months, and we're still working very hard to try to bring closure to this case. Lieutenant Dearlove will go to a little bit more specific. I know we've talked at great lengths about this case. He'll talk about a little bit more detail, and then if there are questions, I'll come back to the podium.
Thank you, Chief. Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Jermaine Dearlove, Homicide Commander for the Police Department. As Chief Shearbaum and Chief Hampton stated earlier, the Homicide Unit remains committed to solving all open cases. We're going to continue with thorough investigations and pursue all leads available, and work with our community to identify additional leads pertaining to these cases. As Chief Hampton stated earlier, this is the one-year anniversary of the Piedmont Park case. We understand the frustration and the heartache of friends and family of the victim, and I offer my condolences to those members. Our homicide investigators are motivated and committed to resolving and solving this case. To date, we have obtained multiple search warrants in and around the area of the incident location. We continue to conduct tactical canvasses to identify additional individuals or witnesses at or around the incident location, and to also follow up on leads generated. As Chief Hampton stated earlier, the Fulton County DA's office, GBI, and the FBI are working collaboratively with us to assist and offer assistance with the investigation as well. In addition, we're also receiving the community's assistance through Crime Stoppers, who I would like to say you could reach at 404-577-TIPS. You can remain anonymous if you don't want to give your name. We would take any additional assistance as well. Chief Hampton stated that we have hours that are put into cases, but I would also like to say that each case has its own unique qualities. Whereas in identifying the suspects, we cannot put a timeline on when it gets resolved. We owe the family and friends of Ms. Janness and the effort and resolve to follow through with identifying the suspects. I'm in constant communication with our lead investigators for this case, and they remain committed as the first day they received the case as well. Thank you.
When you say search warrants, are you talking you searched areas near the park or the DNA search warrants? Can you elaborate on that?
Search warrants could pertain to so many. It was a wide area, so we have many different search warrants as far as like the MARTA bus stations that are in and around the area, the surveillance cameras from businesses that we just have to get search warrants for.
Do you believe that she and the dog were inside the park when they were killed? Were they killed there? Were they killed somewhere else?
From witness statements and follow-up investigations from the investigators, we do believe that it happened right at the entrance of the park.
Is there anything that points to this being random or someone that she may have been associated with or may have come in contact with at work or anything of that nature?
Again, as I stated earlier, it's still an active case. And it's a case that obviously we don't like to put out too much information here, but it's information, those type of questions are daily questions. We feel that we are still in the right area. We feel like that we are have active leads that is, again, that we will bring a closure to this case. You talked about search warrant. This is a case that's rely heavily on biological evidence, heavily on technology evidence. And those things also take time. Some things are out of our control, and so we have to wait until things come back. And again, that could be data coming back from carriers, phone carriers. But again, I stand here to let you know that we are still having active leads that we are currently following up on. And unfortunately, it's just waiting to something just to break.
Is it frustrating that it's been a year and still no one's in custody, and this case hasn't been solved? Is that frustrating for this department?
It's frustrating for any of our open cases. As I stated earlier, these homicide lead detectives, this is personal for them. To stand and call and receive calls from victims' family, and they don't have closure, it is frustrating. But it's frustrating where they stay committed, they stay engaged, it's on their desk, they're still following up. But of course, it's frustrating not to be able to call any family members to say we have someone and we have responsible for the death of your loved one.
Do you still have items out actively?
I'm sorry?
Do you still have items out actively for DNA testing, for phone carrier requests that could potentially break this case?
Yes.
Regarding the Janness case, was a murder weapon ever found there? And also, was there DNA, a suspect's DNA ever recovered from either her body or the dog's?
So, again, questions that obviously a lot of people want to know, and some things, again, I'm just not able to confirm, and I will not confirm at this juncture of the investigation. But again, things that we are still following up on, important things that, again, has kept this case still very active.
Is the public important? Because, Piedmont Park is a large park, it's very open, heavily traffic. Is the public input or tips, leads, is that important? Are you getting anywhere with those?
Yes, as I stated before, a lot of our cases are solved based on the community and just saying something I saw. A lot of people may think that I just see a big thing, but it could just be something minute. It could just be a color of a car. It could be a figure that went southbound on the street. So all that is important to us because, again, it gives us something to follow up on that eventually helps us break the case. So yes, it's very important.
What keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? Just not being able to call any family members to say we got him. So that tells us that our job, especially the homicide unit, is not done. So until we can pick up that phone or go to that door and wrap our arms around that loved one and say, our job is done. And now it's up to the courts to do the rest. But that's what keeps the men and women of the homicide unit zeroed in, laser focused, because they know they have a job to do to bring closure to that victim's family. Because again, that's ultimately who is hurting. The pain of to lose a loved one tragically, unexpected. That's something that's difficult to deal with. And again, the men and women of the homicide unit carry that burden and they try to bring closure for that family.
Chief, there haven't been any similar cases, as far as we know, to the Katie Janness case. Do you think it was somebody who knew her, somebody she was acquainted with, that could get that close to her and her dog?
As I stated earlier, we do not have a suspect identified. And so again, everyone right now, we're looking at everyone. And then making sure, as Lieutenant Dearlove stated, that we make sure that we're doing a thorough investigation, that we don't rush to judgment, because again, that's what's important. And the minute that we start assuming and rushing, that's when mistakes happen. And then that's what prevents us from making that call to the family to say we have the right person.
Has anyone definitively...
You said you were relying on science and technology. Can you elaborate on that?
Again, as I think I stated the early morning of that case, that was a very gruesome scene. And so, again, there were things that obviously the part of the evidence that was collected was biological in nature. And so, again, that is a science, and that takes time to process, and in order to provide the investigators leads to and point them in the right direction.
2 questions left.
A few minutes ago, the term suspect.
No.
Joe?
A few minutes ago, the term suspect was used. Can you definitively say if you're looking for a single attacker or multiple attackers?
We don't know. So I don't want to say it's singular because, again, we do not have anyone right now in custody. So I say suspect or suspects to make sure that everyone knows that we're going to look for anyone and make sure that we go after anyone that's responsible. And that could be one individual or multiple people. But again, right now, we don't have it clearly defined.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right, once again, we're just wrapping up this press conference by the Atlanta Police Department. Still 2 cold cases, Katie Janness and also David Mack, the little 12-year-old who was killed. You know, and this is what reminds me of all of this, and is my previous law enforcement experience. I remember going to a couple of homicide scenes, one in particular where it was shots fired at an apartment complex. We go inside this room, inside this apartment, and there's multiple bodies on the ground. We had to search the house, look for victims, all that, right? Fire shows up, the ambulance shows up, and then the homicide investigators. But we made that so easy to be able to control that environment. It was all in one space. It was all in the apartment. It was all in several rooms. You can control the integrity of the evidence there. Think about this, Caitlin. You had 2 public places. Yeah. Piedmont Park, by the time they found Katie's body, several hours had already gone by. Several people could have walked through that to the crime scene there, also with David Mack, and contaminated the crime scene. So this, I think, is what's making it so difficult for investigators to piece everything together.
Well, it's clear that both of these cases are so difficult and so haunting to these investigators. I think we were talking during that news conference saying it was clear we could see the emotion on their faces, how personal this has become, and how frustrating it is that after a year, and in David Mack's case, almost a year and a half now, they still don't have any suspects. And that's what I think both investigators really hammered home was they're not calling anyone's name out here because they don't know who did this yet. I think it was encouraging to hear that they're still getting leads. Yeah. They said really clearly they're depending on the community. They want community members to come forward, help protect their own here. In the case of Piedmont Park, that neighborhood has been incredibly active, trying to find whoever killed her. I think we heard from the DA right after Katie Janness was murdered, and she said, don't go to Piedmont Park alone. You don't want to walk alone there at night. You don't want to go there by yourself. And clearly that's really scary for people who live there. In David Mack's case, a 12-year-old kid who is described as super likable, popular, funny. People loved him. And to have this happen is just devastating. And I think it's really confusing to people in the audience who are watching this saying, why don't you have more information here? And what we heard from APD is we are working these cases every single day. We're making calls every day. In Katie's case, they said they're still getting warrants to search areas. So I think it's clear these are both still very active investigations, but certainly frustrating for family members and friends who still don't have answers.
And it's got to be frustrating for the investigators as well. They said normally it takes about 6 days to put a case together to find a suspect or at least identify a suspect. Here we have at least a year, we know for Katie, possibly a year and a half for David Mack, and it still goes on. They're asking for just the simple, basic things. Can someone come forward with information? Witnesses. In David Mack's situation, it could be a neighborhood snitch scare situation where folks are afraid to come forward, as they just pointed out, because they're concerned for their own safety. So they don't want to give any information to police. And so that's what the officers are dealing with in both of these tragic situations.
I thought it was a smart question. During that news conference, our reporter Joe Henke asked, there was on the video of David Mack when he was talking to his grandmother right before he goes off camera, you could hear another voice saying something, wrap up that phone call, come over here. And it stood out to me that police still haven't talked to that person.
That voice.
They still haven't identified who that was. So to me, that's a huge question for that community. Who is that person who was saying to David Mack, come on, come this way?
And is that person afraid to come forward? Maybe they could be innocent in this entire situation. They know a lot more, but they're concerned about coming forward because they're concerned not only about their safety, but possibly their family's safety as well.
And I think the safety question is big in Katie Janness's case as well. This was a vicious and brutal murder. A lot of the details we've actually not shared on 11 Alive because they're just horrifying. And we got a statement from her partner's family today saying there's not a day or a minute that goes by that she's not in their minds and on their hearts. And it was her partner who discovered Katie's body. And the horror of that case just lingers a year on. So to still not have answers is so difficult.
It's so difficult. And for those investigators, even though they have to be objective and stay professional, for them to witness all of that and try to collect all that evidence, and especially those crime scenes with a young boy, 12 years old, Katie, and the vicious stabbing there, it's got to be difficult for them to process that and look for suspects at the same time.
Right, absolutely. And I know they are still working this case every single day. They made that clear. They're looking into both of these cases. If you want to read more about them, you can go to 11alive.com. You can also download the 11 Alive app by scanning the link on your screen to receive updates on ongoing stories and extended coverage.
Thanks for joining us on 11 Alive Plus. It's also available on Roku TV and Fire TV. Thanks for joining us.